Now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, welcome. We're going to get started in just about 30 seconds. We're just going to give some of the last minute people a chance to join. Okay, great. Welcome. Hi, I am Mandy Movahead from Handshake. I am very excited to be here today to talk to you about B2B e-commerce. The webinar is called Replacing Outdated B2B e-commerce Tech in Manufacturing and Distribution. As I mentioned, I'm from Handshake, and for those of you guys who don't know much about us, we develop software for manufacturers and distributors. We have a few different products. One of them is for sales reps to write orders in the field on a mobile order writing app, and the other is a B2B e-commerce product, both on web and mobile. And obviously, online ordering, B2B e-commerce is the focus of today's webinar. In my role at Handshake, I've talked to a lot of manufacturers and distributors over the years, and I've been really lucky to learn a lot about e-commerce, both SaaS e-commerce, software as a service, and other types of solutions. And I've learned a lot about this. I've written a lot about this topic. I'm really excited to share some of this with you guys today. I was laughing this morning when I woke up and noticed we live in New York, or we're based in New York, and we had a crazy storm. And I was like, what better thing to do to talk about than talk about e-commerce today? And hopefully a lot of you guys are trapped and just have to listen to this webinar as well. So let's get into the content. To give you a little bit of context here, many of the manufacturers and distributors that we set up with online ordering, they previously were coming from something that was very manual. They didn't really have a solution in place. So their customers were calling, emailing, faxing in orders. The story here is pretty straightforward. They had, they had a manual solution, then they adopt and implement a SaaS B2B e-commerce solution without any previous baggage, so they get it right the first time. There's another set of manufacturers and distributors that we work with, and these are people coming from existing solutions. They have pain points and stories that we're going to be discussing today, and I'm sure a lot of this is going to sound familiar to many of you. Without fail, the number one reason that companies come to us from a previous solution that they're unhappy with is because of adoption. Their buyers are just not using their portal. And that is almost always because the solution feels outdated. It doesn't match the expectations that your buyers have from their consumer lives. And this is what we're going to be going into in great detail today. So I hope you're as excited as I am. A few quick housekeeping things before we get started. I have a fair amount of material to cover, so I'll try my best to stay under 40 or 45 minutes. I'm going to use the last 15 minutes to answer your questions, so if you can do me a favor, if anything comes up during the presentation, please feel free to just type that into the GoToWebinar question box as we go, because it will help us move faster during the Q&A. All right, great, so let's get into it. So what are we going to cover today? So first, we're going to talk about what exactly is a modern buying experience in manufacturing and distribution. What does that really look like? Then we're going to talk about the three camps or the three buckets of outdated solutions that manufacturers and distributors are using today. We'll then go into the specific deficiencies of outdated solutions, and these are deficiencies that are common across these three camps that we're going to talk about in section 2. After that, we'll talk about the strengths of software as a service, SaaS, e-commerce technology, and why it's able to provide a more modern experience for your buyer. And after all of that, we will get to your questions. So let's get into it. All right, so what exactly does modern B2B buying look like? So there's two main components of modern B2B buying. And the first is how much that buyer experience resembles the B2C experience that your buyers are encountering when they shop online for themselves. So I sometimes actually hear that manufacturers and distributors are worried that their buyers aren't ready for online ordering. And let's talk a little bit about why that assumption is going to separate the winners from the losers. The consumer e-commerce market has been rapidly growing over time. And according to Internet Retailer, the market's actually expected to reach close to $500 billion by 2018. I also came across an interesting study recently USPS did in July 2016. They ran a survey that showed for the first time ever, shoppers are making more of their purchases online than in brick and mortar. So, and just intuitively, outside of this data, think about your own life. It's very likely that you shop online regularly. At the very least, you probably made at least one purchase online in your life. So if you think that your buyers aren't ready to shop online, you're wrong, because they're already doing it. And even more importantly, if you think that your buyers don't know what a good e-commerce experience is and can tell when yours is not good, you're also wrong. Sometimes I actually encounter suppliers that are really fixated on creating a B2B e-commerce experience that exactly mirrors what they've been doing for the last 20 years. They're essentially trying to create a digital version of their Excel order form, or they want to reproduce a very cumbersome ordering policy just because they don't want to disrupt whatever their buyers are used to, even if it's a very bad experience. And this is a really dangerous and, to be honest, pretty misinformed mentality. Just know that your customers have had exceptional B2C buyer experiences, and you are going to fall drastically short of these expectations if you do what you've always done. We'll be getting a little bit more into some of this later, but what's often missing from these outdated B2B solutions are the things that are very strong in B2C. So it's things like the polished digital catalog, sophisticated search capabilities such that you can search not only on SKU name or a SKU number, but also faceted search on product attributes. And then, of course, B2C tends to provide a much stronger mobile commerce experience as well. So the other thing that's really important in defining modern in B2B e-commerce is how well it covers the actual B2B part of B2B selling. So a solution needs to be able to accommodate your selling rules, your promotional strategy, tiered pricing, you name it. If it can't, for example, if your buyers usually get access to 10% off their order, but your portal doesn't reflect the discount, you've actually created an additional step in the process where the buyer now needs to call the customer service team to have them manually adjust the order. And that really defeats the purpose of a self-service automated solution and does not feel modern. And I really encourage you to think about a corresponding experience you might have had in B2C. So would you continue to shop on a website if every time you place the order, you'd also have to make a call to the support team? Basically, in that scenario, you would either never shop on that site again, or if they were lucky, you'd probably call them directly rather than wasting your time online. And I just would encourage you to think about this scenario because it can kind of help explain why you might not be seeing usage of your portal. So let's get into the meat of the webinar, and we're going to start off with the 3 camps of outdated solutions. So we know now what constitutes a modern buyer experience in B2B. So let's talk about when we say outdated, what we're really referring to here. So there's 3 main camps or buckets of outdated solutions. The first is legacy third-party e-commerce solutions. And these are typically on-prem solutions, on-premise, meaning they're deployed software, and they've typically been around for a while. And you can tell because they look very early internet. The second bucket here is the ERP Extension bucket. And these are e-commerce solutions that are developed by your ERP vendor. The final bucket is custom-built homegrown solutions. And these are ones that are built by a third-party development agency or by very ambitious internal tech teams. So now we're going to go a little bit more in depth into each of these buckets. So legacy third-party e-com solutions. These are standalone online ordering software solutions that are on-premise, meaning they have to be deployed and maintained on the servers that the software is hosted on. And for those of you who are running these types of solutions, you know that they require you to make a pretty significant investment in both hosting infrastructure and the dedicated personnel to maintain them. So on the website, these solutions are what we refer to as Gen 1 e-commerce sites. Gen 1 e-commerce, like I said, kind of early internet solutions, they felt innovative when they first came out in the earlier days of the internet, and they provide they provided its purpose as really a more rudimentary way to transact online. We've really just evolved so much in consumer e-commerce and in general across software as a whole that these sites now feel very out of place. On the mobile side, legacy solutions typically, especially in industries like F&B and food and beverage, are barcode scanning technologies, sometimes referred to as bricks on a stick. They were also considered very innovative decades ago when they first came out. And given the importance of shelf-side reordering for certain industries, like food and beverage, for example, a lot of suppliers in this industry were quick to jump on this bandwagon and grab that barcode scanner tech. So why do people continue to adopt these third-party legacy solutions? Let's talk a little bit more about that. So like we just talked about, Gen 1 eCom and barcode scanners both felt a bit innovative at one time. And early on, quite frankly, there weren't really a ton of options to choose from. They also tend to be industry specific. So they tout themselves as e-commerce for the outdoor industry or for gifted homewares or for food and beverage specifically. And this provides some comfort to manufacturers and distributors that their particular use case will be accounted for. And finally, when implemented, they often allow for customization, which again provides comfort that hopefully most of the seller's business rules will be accommodated for. It's the case, though, that the upsides of this customization are dramatically outweighed by the downsides, which we'll talk about next. So let's talk about why these solutions feel so outdated. So one of the reasons is the process of updating an on-prem solution is very costly and very cumbersome, particularly if any of that customization work has been done. Because suppliers, every time they want to make this update, they have to face this resource drain, both in terms of money and time. Every time they want to add a new feature or try to do this upgrade, they often choose to forego innovation and improvement, hoping that their buyers can make do with what's been in place just a little bit longer. On the mobile side, it's pretty obvious why the legacy barcode scanner feels outdated. It's because we have smartphones. We have these lightweight, visual, powerful phones, and it's a pretty stark contrast from that fat, clunky analog scanner. All right, ERP extensions. So this is our next camp of outdated B2B e-commerce solutions. And so this is an ERP add-on or extension. And these are e-commerce modules that an ERP vendor builds, and then they bundle as part of their offering. So why do people adopt these technologies? It's pretty straightforward. The tight integration with the ERP is pretty much the driving force behind this usually. And it's often negotiated as part of a sales deal and thrown in for free. So it's kind of like a why not situation. So going the ERP route for your e-commerce solution is a surefire way not to provide a very modern experience to your buyers for a few very interesting reasons. This is actually one of my favorite topics in e-commerce. So first up, the ERP is the financial ledger and inventory management system of your business. It is incredibly complex. It's a beast. It's a crazy software system built for the back office, but it's not for your sales reps or your customers who are the front lines of your business. Commerce is also not the core competency of an ERP company. It's an afterthought that is pieced together to satisfy the B2B use case that they know you need. It's just not the focus of the ERP vendor. And that shows in the way the software is developed. And one of my favorite insights that I've learned over the years in terms of software adoption and the ERP is this concept of forced in versus opt-in adoption. So you can think about it this way. When you roll out an ERP, your customer service team, your ops people, your IT people, they just don't have a choice whether they can use this thing. They have to. These internal people have to use it, and for that reason, ERPs don't have to prioritize developing software that people want to use. I would encourage you just to think a little bit about your own respective ERP. People complain about this to me all the time. It's very clunky, it's unintuitive, the interface is just not user-friendly at all. It's like a necessary evil that they have to deal with. So this is what we call forced adoption. It's something that you have to use whether you like it or not. So on the flip side, B2B e-commerce software requires opt-in adoption. Because your customers are paying you and you want them to be happy, you can't really force them to use your ordering portal. And by the way, if you can, congrats, you have a unique business model. So software that's designed and developed for opt-in adoption is more user-friendly because it has to be. It's meant to inspire repeat usage, and the ERP vendor has no experience creating this type of software. So the final reason that the ERP e-commerce add-on tends to feel a little bit old school is around mobile. ERPs do not excel on the mobile front. And in fact, the mobile commerce in the ERP add-on scenario often means that you're giving your customers kind of a login to your ERP's online ordering portal module, but from a mobile web browser. And in this day and age, modern mobile experiences are really only provided through native mobile applications. So this mobile web browser experience for online ordering is a very subpar user experience. If you're not familiar, by the way, with native mobile, these are applications that are downloaded from an app store, and they usually can function offline. The mobile web browser commerce experience of the ERP, on the flip side, is very reliant on the internet connection, and it doesn't have the kind of snappiness and responsiveness of a native mobile app. So just kind of imagine the frustration of the user experience for your buyers. So they're basically having to use what is already a very unintuitive buyer experience, something like a 500-line order form that looks like an Excel document on the web. But now they're doing all of this from a very small mobile screen. All right, so let's move on to the custom-built bucket. So the last bucket is custom-built solutions, ones that are built by a third-party development agency or an internal tech team, and then this is a fun one. So for anyone who is on this webinar who has project managed or maybe played a role in putting together a bespoke online ordering portal, I think it's a safe bet that it feels like you're biting off more than you can chew. So the intention behind this is pretty clear. So typically they're built when the company or the supplier wants something extremely customized because they're concerned that an existing solution just can't handle their business requirements. And this is where I've seen the most horror stories. So these homegrown custom-built solutions also tend to feel very outdated, and here's why. First, they are almost always built without expertise in commerce software. So whether it's a more generalist development agency that takes on all of these different types of commerce software, or sorry, not commerce, custom software contracts, whatever they may be, or just a bunch of capable internal programmers that just want to take this on, creating a robust B2B online ordering portal takes a lot more than just knowing how to code. I've also worked with a lot of really talented developers in my day, especially when I've been in really early stage environments. And I understand this impulse behind wanting to build versus buy. But most of the time, what happens is an initial project spec is done, and then people start to realize what's really involved and hopefully get out before it's too late. So a few realities on the homegrown solution front. So basically, they're really, really optimized around business-specific workflows that end up distracting from e-commerce best practices. So usually it's a company's attachment to a very complicated promotional rule, like if my buyer buys 10 of this, I want to give them a free one of these, but only if we have it in stock. And if not, then I want to give them 10% off, but only if it's on a day of the week that starts with a T. So obviously I'm being a little facetious in this example, I hope. But the point is it's very, very complicated, and it's to the point where the buyer doesn't even understand it. So in that scenario, you're better off really simplifying your promotional strategy rather than building your entire e-commerce portal to support these types of business workflows. And at the end of the day, the modern e-commerce solution is one that your buyer doesn't have to work at understanding. The other thing to think about in these homegrown solutions is they just don't age well because they're what we call one-and-done software projects. People think of them as a one-time initiative that they're hopefully not going to have to update for a while, which is a mentality that is just not compatible with the rapid evolution of technology and growing buyer expectations. Another thing to keep in mind, which I'm sure some of you have experienced, is that what really hampers innovation is when whoever managed the original project is no longer with the company. So there's just no institutional knowledge, and people just don't want to deal with the kind of having to dig back into that project and do the upgrade or the feature add. Great. So that wraps up the three camps. I'm pretty sure that those of you on this webinar are able to identify with at least one of them, or if you haven't jumped into any of them yet, you're lucky because you can at least learn a little bit more before you make the decision. We're now going to go into the common deficiencies that the solutions we just talked about share. And to be honest, a lot of this is going to feel hopefully like a little bit of a review of some of the concepts we just talked about. All right, so the first thing that these solutions share, they all share a poor user experience. So we've driven this home already, but whether it's because it was built by a vendor that doesn't understand the principles of opt-in adoption, or a generalist who doesn't understand e-commerce, or it was built 20 years ago, the user experience of outdated solutions does not line up with the current expectations of your buyer. One thing I often see in food and beverage distribution is this concept of the order guide. And I always think it's kind of amusing when a food distributor tries to create an e-com solution that basically is a digital version of the order guide, and they say it's important because it's what their buyers are used to. And just because your buyers are used to something very subpar, because that's all you provided to them for years, does not mean you should spend all this money to just simply digitize this order guide. And basically, it's the case that if you implement an e-commerce portal with an intuitive enough buyer user experience, that they're really not going to have any issue figuring it out, and they're going to start ordering from you more than before. So user experience, quote unquote, it's kind of a catch-all term that covers many things that are wrong with outdated solutions, but as a reminder, it's also that poor mobile experience. The thing we haven't talked much about is the support for the nitty-gritty B2B selling stuff. And that's things like pricing and promotions that are really customer specific. The point to stress here is that an ordering portal needs to be able to support business rules and promotions, because being able to show things like this discount to that tier of customer, or the ability to set order minimums, for example, this is all very fundamental to selling B2B. One thing I get a lot of feedback on, specifically from companies that are using their ERP add-ons for online ordering, is that they really can't accomplish the promotional strategy they're trying to achieve. And a lot of these companies are frustrated because they want to drive more sales with a promotional strategy, but they've just kind of been putting it on hold because that solution cannot handle the use case. All right. So the inferior digital catalog. So we just talked about this, but a lot of these solutions offer a poor excuse for a catalog. It's really more of a glorified order form. And here's a beautiful example of a real solution right here. Something important to note on this example that I thought was really interesting. I was doing some research and pulling screenshots for the webinar, just kind of looking at other vendors and seeing what's out there. This is an example of a vendor that recently updated their solution, and this is kind of like the launch of their new interface. So I'm not trying to be critical here, but I think the important takeaway is that the term updated is very much in the eye of the beholder, and in terms of a lot of these legacy solutions, the idea of updated is coming from something so archaic that the updated version still is not matching what we feel to be modern e-commerce. So, the important thing to notice here is, again, this does not resemble the B2C catalog at all. It's pretty much an order form. The imagery feels very clip arty, and there's little to no space for any product info. Okay, so now we're going to talk about data access. So a lot of these outdated solutions lack access to important data that's required for a better buyer experience. One of these things is inventory data. So inventory data is typically displayed in the ERP add-on solutions because of the integration with the ERP tends to have a lot of that data. But the third-party legacy solutions and the custom-built tech often doesn't bring it in. And this leads to blind ordering by your buyers, which they may order something on back order, for example, and that's totally not a modern buyer experience at all. Order history is also a big one. I've talked to some companies that deal with a solution that can only give their customers access to a limited amount of order history, or it won't let them duplicate a past order. And that reorder workflow of order duplication is really common in B2B, so it's important that a modern portal has that duplication feature. The last point here is on the marketing and product collateral front. And typically these solutions, particularly the ERP extensions that don't have that marketing focus, they don't really have a kind of hub to host this type of content for your buyers. All right, mobile, quick reminder on this. We've gone over this, but plain and simple, outdated solutions do not leverage consumer mobile devices. They are not using the smartphones and the tablets that we're using in our everyday lives. When they do, they're almost always requiring you to access the ordering portal on a mobile web browser instead of using the native app. So we talked about this point already in a fair amount of detail, but the quick and dirty reminder on the stagnation and inflexibility point is this. The way that these solutions have been built makes it very difficult to innovate on top of, whether it's due to the technical DNA of the actual software itself or the fact that it's so expensive to upgrade. This contributes to an increasingly large gap that you can see here on the graph here. It's between your current buyer experience and the expectations your buyers have, whether that's set by their consumer life or a more positive experience with your competitors. So a lot of manufacturers and distributors move to SaaS solutions specifically to solve this challenge of stagnant technology. So it's a perfect time for us to segue into the next section, which is the strengths of SaaS. So in this section, we're going to talk about why SaaS e-commerce provides a much more modern buyer experience than the three camps of tech that we just went over. So the first is the strong commerce user experience. I love this point. I mean, obviously I work at a SaaS company and we talk a lot about the value of SaaS, but it's always a good reminder to really think about why SaaS technology leads to a more informed, powerful user experience. So let's take a little step back. A lot of businesses go towards SaaS because of cost, ease of implementation, because they can offload the responsibility of ongoing updates and maintenance. But one of the biggest benefits of going SaaS is that you get to benefit from the best practices gleaned from thousands of users. So basically, a SaaS vendor can use the data points from all of their user base to inform a very iterative process, which means we're constantly refining and improving the product based on usage from a diverse set of users. This is the opposite of developing a product in a vacuum with only your specific business requirements in mind. It's about incorporating best practices across a bunch of different industries and use cases to solve an overarching business problem. In the case of B2B e-commerce, SaaS vendors develop online ordering software that is informed by an expertise in B2B selling because it's all we see and all we do all day. I can tell you I never thought I would know so much about online ordering and B2B e-commerce. It means that user experience is the most tested it means that the user experience of SaaS is the most tested and intuitive one out there, and because it's actually based on real life users and it's constantly being improved. SaaS B2B e-commerce also gives you access to customer-specific pricing, customer-specific promotions, and product assortments, so you can really provide a very tailored buyer experience when the buyer logs in. And of course, a strong e-commerce user experience also leverages that consumer mobile device. All right, so let's talk about the digital catalog. So how much you really need rich imagery as part of your selling strategy kind of depends on your industry. But no matter what, across all industries, the use of imagery in a digital catalog allows you to highlight your products in their best light. So even if you're distributing products that are very familiar, like produce or maybe highly recognized brands, strong imagery is always a best practice you should keep in mind. But I can think of a lot of examples outside of that more standard use case for imagery that have been really powerful within some of the customers I've seen improve their digital browsing experience. So one of our high-end meat distributors, for example, they really cut down on the number of samples that they need to bring into their appointments because their samples were fairly expensive for these high-end cuts of meat, $8 or $9 each. So now they just rely on the digital catalog and the high-res images in there. And the images are high quality enough that the buyer or oftentimes chefs or store owners don't actually need to see the products in person. The other thing that's really important about imagery is with actually on the mobile commerce side and shelf side ordering. So one of the great benefits of using a smartphone as your barcode scanner is that after you do the scan, you can get that visual confirmation that you're scanning the right product. And this is something that an old school barcode scanner can't do because it's just a very one-dimensional analog device. So this also goes without saying, but just make sure that your SaaS e-commerce vendor has ample space for your product descriptions. You shouldn't face any of those space restrictions that we saw with the glorified order form solutions. So information access. We've talked about how information or the lack of information can really hurt the buyer process. So let's talk about the flip side, how it can help. So we recently actually put out a one-sheet document that talks about the power of displaying inventory data in manufacturing and distribution. If you want me to send that along, just type inventory in the question box and I'll have someone send it over email. So the summary of this document is basically this, that strong SaaS solutions should allow you to customize the way you'd like to display inventory to your buyers. So whether that's just simply an in or out of stock notification, or that's actual inventory levels, or the date that it's going to be available to ship again. And this is the type of info that buyers want and need to be able to make fully informed decisions when they're placing orders. On the order history front, we've talked about this. Just make sure that order duplication feature is there. It's really important to quickly replicating and submitting a reorder, something that's very common in manufacturing and distribution. And on the marketing and product collateral side, it's really ideal if you can aggregate helpful docs like lookbooks or planograms or nutrition guides. Maybe you want to host product videos, anything that would really provide context or support to your buyers on how to best utilize your products. Strong B2B e-commerce SaaS solutions actually allow you to do this, so make sure that they have that hub. So one of the biggest differentiators, as we've talked about, of SaaS over any of the prevailing categories of solutions we've talked about is the superior mobile experience. So this is back to what we were talking about with native mobile. So if you want to provide your buyers with an ordering experience that they want to use and will actually come back for, it has to be on a native mobile application. And native mobile applications are superior for a bunch of reasons. One of them is that they typically can function offline. And because they're not reliant on whatever internet connection that your buyer has at the time, they're much faster and they're much more responsive. The speed and the performance of a native app is actually not only about access to the internet, but a native mobile application is actually totally optimized for the hardware itself, the operating system of the hardware itself. So it taps into things like you can see here, like the barcode scanner. Like you can use your camera as a barcode scanner, for example. That's the kind of core functionality of the phone itself. You can tap into your contact list to pull in your customers. And then you can just see here that the entire app is just optimized perfectly for the screen. It looks crisp, it looks modern. It's a big contrast to that mobile web experience where content might appear smaller, or your buyer has to zoom to view images, descriptions, form fields. It's just not a great experience. All right, so the last strength listed here is adaptability and customization, and is generally one of the biggest reasons companies go with SaaS. Your SaaS B2B e-commerce vendor is going to be handling the regular improvements and updates. Those are included in the price of the subscription, so you don't have to decide between either incurring financial pain or making your customers happy, which is not an easy decision for any business to make. Hopefully you always choose your customers, but we all know that sometimes that's difficult. The other thing that's really important, and one of my favorite topics, is this idea of the balance between a strong off-the-shelf product that includes features that satisfy the default use case of most companies, but also allow for customization using an open API. And this is really what makes an exceptional SaaS solution. It's really that mix. So this particular topic, which is the off-the-shelf commerce technology that you can then customize to perfectly suit your business, it's one we've been discussing a lot here at Handshake, and we actually have a webinar coming up in a few weeks on this topic on February 22nd. So if you are interested in attending, just type webinar in the question box. It's going to be really interesting. It kind of encourages you to think, I'm really familiar with this webinar because I prepared it. It's basically all about the questions that manufacturers and distributors are asking in this current time to think about and prepare for digital disruption, and how preparing for disruption is about making sure that you're kind of staying current with the trends in technology, but also making sure that your business case and your workflows are covered. So yep, if you want any info on that, just type register in there. Okay, so the impacts of a modern solution. So we're coming into home stretch now, and we're going to now talk about the so what. So what is the impact of a modern B2B e-commerce solution on your business? So the first one is pretty clear. It's stronger customer adoption. And this is the whole point of online ordering in the first place. It's to get people to use your portal, place more orders. It's pretty intuitive. If you provide a great user experience to your buyers, they want to use your portal. The better it is, the more it aligns with the high bar set by experiences they've either had in their consumer lives or with your competitors' buyer experience, and the more they're going to want to order from you. And of course, this is obvious, but if your buyers are able to place orders from anywhere on any device, they're more likely to place that order. So the other big point about on the impact of modern solutions is on the revenue side. So there are a bunch of reasons that strong e-commerce solutions provide or kind of give you that revenue impact. So we did a survey in the summer, actually, of 450 manufacturers and distributors, and a lot of really interesting information came back. We pushed a lot on the B2B e-commerce side, and 50% of respondents with strong B2B e-commerce solutions found that their buyers were using their portal to discover and order new products. 34% saw an increase in order frequency. I'm sorry, actually in average order value across the board. 45% saw an increase in order frequency, and 79% said that buyers that were previously inactive became active once again after they implemented online ordering. So outside of this data that has come back from this great survey we did, I've seen a lot of really good examples of this within the Handshake customer base as well that I can share. So another one of our meat distributors, a really big one that distributes in this area in the Northeast. So they used to have 40% of the meat business in one particular supermarket chain. And once they implemented our native mobile ordering app, so giving them that very superior mobile ordering experience, they now have 70% of the meat business in this chain. We also work with a baby products distributor out of Australia. They saw an increase in average order value of 20%, and they attribute that to the fact that the self-serve browsing of e-commerce kind of allows their customers to discover more complementary products and really kind of pair their order in a way that makes more sense for them. And then the final example I have on the increased revenue front is Cooper Booth Wholesale, which is one of our big C-store or convenience store distributors. For those of you who are not in that industry, I shouldn't be using the C-store nickname. But after they implemented online ordering, they actually saw an increase in their average order value of 28% in that first year. So what are some of the other impacts? One of them is operational efficiency. So let's talk about the two different ways that plays out often. So the first one is that SaaS e-commerce solutions are much easier to administer than their on-premise or homegrown counterparts, which we all know by this point require a ton of time and resources to update and maintain. The vendor handles all of it. Updates and feature additions are regular, and the upgrade process it requires little to no effort. It's either installing the new app from the App Store or logging into the web and kind of realizing those feature improvements. The other thing is just a better deployment of resources. So the time that your customer service team previously had to spend fixing mistakes caused by that outdated portal, things like back orders or manually having to apply a promotion to an order after the fact, this time can now be spent on proactive strategic work, things that really move your business forward rather than fighting fires. Another thing that's related to the point of easier administration is this concept called cost of ownership, like our total cost of ownership. SaaS definitely gives you a lower cost of ownership, partially because it's just, like as we talked about, like the kind of feature upgrades and everything is included in the membership price or the subscription price. So the final point here is on competitive differentiation. And I just want to kind of drive this point home as we close out the webinar that we're living in a really amazing time where we're seeing the transition of manufacturing and distribution from manual to digital, and in many cases from antiquated early internet technology to modern web and mobile e-commerce. And there's a very small window for you right now where you can still differentiate from your competitors by providing an exceptional buyer experience, because not everyone is doing this yet. And that's actually going to change rapidly over the next few years. According to a recent study by Forrester, 83% of B2B buyers say that strong customer service encourages them to make repeat purchases. And in this scenario, a great buyer experience is one that doesn't require any manual interface with your customer service team, and that equates to more seamless fulfillment and faster shipping. This is exactly the type of customer experience that can differentiate you from your competitors. Okay. So before we start the Q&A, I've been seeing a lot of great questions coming in, so thank you for that. I've seen some specific requests to see a little bit more of Handshake, which is probably not really something we have time for today, but we can do something we do actually every once in a while is we play a little game on these webinars where The first 20 people who type 20 into the webinar question box will get 20% off Handshake. So this is a big turnout today, so this might be a little bit more cutthroat than usual, but feel free to type that in there, and I will try my best to have someone reach out with you with some more information and that discount. All right. Lots of questions. Whoa. All right. I don't think we're going to get time for all of these, but this is great. Okay, just a few more seconds to put that 20 in before we move on. Okay, so the first question I see here is, where is the content? Do you use a PIM or PIM? Thanks for that question, Jim. So the question or the answer is a few-fold. So the first thing is, in terms of the content, the way Handshake works as a SaaS e-commerce solution is that you upload all of your product imagery, your descriptions. That process is done during the onboarding process, and that's hosted on a website that we can give you a domain for, or you can host on your own website. That's where the content is hosted. In terms of the PIM, so right now we're doing a lot of work on building out the platform functionality and capabilities of Handshake such that you're going to be able to integrate to a lot of best-in-class solutions. From what I understand on the roadmap, there is some talk about kind of PIM integration, but depending on how critical this is for you, I can definitely have someone reach out to you a little bit more on the kind of product vision on that front. Jim also asked a question, have we integrated into any market available ERP systems, especially hard goods? So the question, I don't have experience specifically in the hard goods ERP system segment, but the best way for me to answer this question is we have integrated into every type of ERP that you can imagine, from small to large, very complex layered ERP systems. Some of them are incredibly complicated and customized. We have a great professional services team that kind of builds these custom integrations for your team and works through that with you. So it's definitely the case that we can build an integration to any ERP, and I'd be happy to speak with to put you in touch with anyone on our team to talk more about that. I'm seeing a bunch of questions about a copy. Will a copy of this be available afterwards? Yes, it will. So I will definitely be sending, or someone will be sending you a copy, both of the slides and the recording of the webinar. Thanks for asking. All right, Joe's saying he'll take any more information we have on APIs, SaaS, etc. Joe, I hope you know what you're asking for, because I have a lot of information on that. I'll follow up with you to make sure what would be most helpful to you, so I don't barrage you with 100 different guides, but thank you for that question. Okay, Jim, any sales analysis from sales history from e-commerce and other order entry methods? Okay, I believe what you're asking is, can you achieve this sales analysis or reporting within the e-commerce solution? And I can answer from the Handshake perspective, obviously. So there's a few things that you can kind of look at here. So the first thing is we do have a lot of people who choose to bring in their order history from the before Handshake time into the system, such that they can have more robust reporting or accurate reporting from time zero. So that's definitely possible. And I think we're building a little bit more functionality into that. Like we have a bunch of kind of custom objects and different types of data that you can bring into your e-commerce solution specifically to make it exactly personalized for what you need. The other thing that I should mention is in terms of aggregation of other order entry methods. So we have a lot of people who use our e-commerce solution in concert with our mobile order writing app that I mentioned kind of when we opened up the webinar. And basically that allows you to aggregate in one central backend and one admin interface all of the orders that are coming in, both from your customers online in the field, both on web and mobile, and also from your sales reps that are doing that entry into the mobile app. And then, of course, there's also like this third bucket of order entry, which can be done by your customer service team directly into the web interface, like in your backend web interface. So all of this data then informs the sales reporting. So hopefully that answers your question. Let's see. Sorry, I'm still looking. There's just a lot of 20s that I'm wading through. Okay. Here's a good question from Eric. How do I keep my competitors from seeing my prices? So that's a great question. There's a few ways to look at that. I think the biggest way to answer that would just be that we advise that, and most people employ this approach, B2B e-commerce and these ordering portals, they're typically login gated. So it's the case that you will be vetting each login that will be using your portal. So it's not the case that you just open the portal up to the public and let anyone come in. I mean, some people do that as an expansion strategy, but for a lot of people who do B2B business, there's an extensive process to vet your customers. You want to do the credit check on them. You don't want to just let any person come in. So it is the case that only those people, only those customers that you actually invite and send a login to can get into your portal. So they will not be seeing your prices. Hopefully that answers. Best argument against our web designer who'll say, sure, we can do that. I mean, okay, Marcus, we should talk, but if I didn't give you enough ammunition in this webinar, we'll talk more about it. But I would just say that for all the reasons we talked about, building an e-commerce solution is an incredibly sophisticated undertaking. I mean, I need to know more about your web designer. The fact that they're even called a web designer makes me think they can't do it based on the title. But I'm sure they're very capable. The thing I would say is, if that person does not have an expertise in B2B selling, so even if they decided to kind of model it after a consumer e-commerce experience, they would not know the nuances of B2B selling versus B2C selling. For example, B2C selling, it's all about getting someone to click buy now. It's about a one-time, or a one product purchase. It's about getting their information. It's about, making sure they don't abandon the cart. This is a very, very different buyer user experience than something in B2B where you have all of your buyer's information already. You are optimizing for high volume ordering. It's just a completely different use case. And it's just not something that most people can pull off without experience of watching thousands and thousands of companies do this. I would say to your web designer, I'm sure you're capable, but we just think we don't have the time and resources to invest in this type of project right now. And, we want the expertise that comes with some of that expertise on the e-commerce side. Hopefully that works, but if not, let me know. Okay, more people asking for the webinar, integration, ERP. AJ, can we integrate with marketplaces like Walmart, Jet, Amazon? Good question. So last year, I talked a lot about this concept, this kind of marketplace versus direct concept, and it's an interesting one. So the long story short is this. The direct model of e-commerce, which we're talking about right now, is a specific browsing experience for your buyers only. It's on your website. It's gated. It's something that they are not. They're there for you, and they're not distracted by any other competitors. It's just it's a direct experience. The marketplace experience, like the Amazon type of interfaces of the world. Some people go that route because of the perception of kind of the customer expansion or, just customer acquisition in general, which of course happens sometimes. Unfortunately, a lot of the customers acquired by marketplaces tend to be a little bit lower quality because they're maybe trying out your brand for the first time or placing smaller orders, and they don't have that long time rapport that you've had with some of your longtime buyers. However, as time goes on, I see the market really moving in a direction it's going to be somewhat of a hybrid strategy where people, pursue. A lot of people might have just jumped on the marketplace bandwagon early on because it's easier to plug into an existing interface. But really, in order to build true brand awareness and that customer experience that you need to provide. It's about that direct portal. So that was kind of a roundabout way to answer the question and say that no, you do not integrate your direct portal with a marketplace, and that's actually really for your benefit. And if you're going to pursue a marketplace option, you should do that alongside and continue to build your direct presence. Okay. I'm seeing some really specific, like, have you seen effective e-commerce with products that would look the same? Okay, so have you seen effective e-commerce when the products sold are raw materials / ingredients where most products would look the same? For example, white powders or dozens of different grades of starches. That's a good question. I have to think a little bit more about that, but it kind of goes back to the fact that the B2B e-commerce experience is not only about the visual imagery, it's about much more than that. It's about inventory, it's about mobile, it's about a strong buyer flow, it's about only showing your buyers the promotions and kind of the products that they have access to. It doesn't have to be that your products are differentiated visually in order to have a strong experience. I mean, regardless if they look similar, you're still needing to, like, in order to provide an exceptional user experience, all of the rest of these things are still at play regardless of the imagery. Hope that helps. And on that note, if I can talk to some people on the team to see if we have some examples of something a little bit more similar to this industry I can share with you. All right, some other, let's see. Can I also have a generic portal for small ordering? I'm not exactly sure, Kevin. Kevin, you might have been the same person who asked about not letting your competitors see the pricing. I'm not sure, actually. Sorry, there's so many things coming in. It's a big list. But I don't really exactly know what that means, so I'm going to need to follow up with you. But I think generic might mean non-login based. And again, that's kind of a do it at your own risk situation. If you want to do it for acquisition purposes, you can. Interesting that you say small ordering, because actually that plays into a big customization piece of the Handshake platform that we're building out right now in a more robust way. But basically, you could do something with a custom business rule where you set an order maximum. So maybe, which actually is kind of hilarious because typically people are setting order minimums. But if you want to only allow for small orders because you want to vet the buyer, for example, you could do something that says only allow the buyer to submit an order if the dollar amount is under $1,000, for example. So yeah, you can definitely achieve that if you want. But again, it's a kind of a strange use case. Do companies use confidentiality agreements in regards to exposing their pricing? Ron, I'm not exactly sure what you mean. If this is about our terms of use and kind of our confidentiality agreement, we don't use this data and we don't show anyone any of your like custom customer or pricing data. So I'm not exactly sure what you mean, but maybe you can follow up with me after and we can talk about it. Let's see. Do you have any options for bill presentment and payment in your solution? So right now, Joe, Handshake has kind of the typical manufacturing and distribution, like wholesale payment term options, like whether that's COD or net 30 or whatever, and it's customer specific based on the needs of your customer. We're also currently actively building out the payment processing portion of our product, so that's coming soon. Is there an ERP solution that you work closely with or recommend that is in the distribution wholesale focus? That's a great question. So, the decision to go with a particular ERP is so company specific and it can be very niche depending on your needs. But I can tell you that we work a lot with NetSuite. NetSuite is a cloud ERP. It's very innovative. And because of the cloud connection with us, we find there to be a good synergy there. So the other reason we work a lot with NetSuite. We also have a turnkey integration with them. So a lot of NetSuite people come to us specifically because we have a default package integration that can get people up and running very quickly. So yeah, Steve, if you want to talk a little bit more offline, I'm probably not the expert on all ERPs, but I can give you some information about some stories we've heard across the board. And definitely our professional services team can share with you their opinions, because I'm sure they would have very strong opinions about the best ERPs to use and the best to stay away from, for sure. Okay. Is Handshake capable in doing both B2B and B2C, running parallel, so we can sell to businesses with a price level and end consumers have a different retail price? So usually when I address the B2B, B2C question, it's because someone already has a B2C solution in place and they're trying to force it to work for B2B. And typically that's not the right approach because, again, like I said, the entire workflow and buyer experience in B2C versus B2B is just, they're not optimized around the same activities. And so it's not in your interest to provide that same workflow for your customers. That being said, people love to create loopholes and make hacks with their solutions. So there's probably scenarios in our customer base where people are doing this, where you might want to, maybe you have an end user that has a particular login and because you can customize the price list for every single one of your customers anyway, it might be the case that some people create like a consumer price list. To be honest, I don't have a lot of experience in seeing this happen, and I would imagine that we advise against it, but I can definitely speak with our team to see if that's a use case that we see. This is a great question, Robert. What is a reasonable adoption rate percentage target for switching customers onto an online wholesale portal? So, great question. We have not talked much about adoption, and adoption is a topic I love. I've done a lot of content on adoption for Handshake, and by the way, if anyone's interested in adoption content in general, like strategies or tactics or emails that you should be sending if you are going to go about taking your people off a legacy solution and moving them to a new solution, let me know. Just put adoption in the guide here, or sorry, in the question box, and I'll send that along to you. In terms of a reasonable adoption rate, so I have seen adoption anywhere from about, like, strong adoption typically is in like the 40 to 50% range, sometimes 70. I've seen people have 75% adoption. It's just really hard to say with a kind of a definitive mark for adoption rate, particularly because if you are in a scenario where 80% of your business is within 10% of your buyer base and you have all 100% of that 10% using your portal, that's really strong adoption. So I'm happy to talk with you a little bit more about adoption strategies and what you should be looking at. I also, in our guide, we have some kind of benchmarks and ways of looking at how you should be calculating this percentage and, like, what's your numerator, what's your denominator. So I'm happy to talk about that with you. I'm a distributor with a massive catalog of available parts. Is there a limit or a point where I would need to limit my line card on my website? So that's a great question, and it's really about scale. Just a really quick time check. It's 1:58 right now. I'm happy to stay a few minutes extra for anyone's questions that I haven't received, maybe 5 to 10 minutes max. My feelings are not going to be hurt for any of you who need to leave, but for those of you who want to stay, it's fine. There's just so many great questions today that we don't have time to get all of them. So okay, back to your question, Kevin. So the question, this is basically more about scale and like a combination of scale partially, and also I think you're asking, is there a limit to the number of SKUs you can actually host on your website? And it sounds like maybe is there a reason for your buyers that you would need to do that? Maybe that you're getting at that. So one of the great things about Handshake, we definitely don't have a limit on the number of SKUs. We work with a lot of businesses that also, especially in this industrial kind of space, but I've seen, seeds and like in the plant kind of industry. I mean, people who work with, who sell thousands of SKUs. No, there's no limit. And it's very important for you to vet this if you're looking at solutions, just because the ability to accommodate scale is something that is vastly discrepant across different solutions. And it's kind of the case that it's also hard to vet this particular capability within a sales conversation, because you're you're not really able to fully set up your entire account before you go with a particular vendor. So what I would really encourage you to do if you talk to us or if you talk to anyone else is get a lot of referenceable customers that have kind of a similar business or use case to yours, and not only determine whether your vendor is able to handle that, but also determine, have these people been on the system for years? Because one of the big issues with a high volume SKU catalog is that not only are you hosting all of this product information, but as the years go on and tons of this order data is coming into your portal, that scale needs to be built as well. So you just need to make sure that that can be accommodated. Lots of adoption stuff. Cool. Great. So Robert said he'd like some information on adoption and would like to know specifically about incentive strategies. So just before we close out, I can tell you, yes, incentives definitely work. A lot of people use incentives as a mechanism to get people in the door for the first time. Particularly, adoption is about changing behavior, either whether it's coming from a manual solution or a manual method, or you're coming from an existing portal. Especially if your customers have been scarred by your former portal, it might take a little bit of cajoling to get them to use your product, or your new portal. So I would definitely suggest that an incentive that you really put on blast, both in your subject line and your emails and through your sales reps, that's definitely a strategy that we see a lot of people using. Okay, wow. This was an action-packed webinar. I had a lot of fun. I hope you guys did too. Here's my info if you want to email me. My email's right here. Our phone number is here as well if you have any questions. I will definitely have our team follow up with any of you guys who have asked some of these great handshake questions or are interested in the discount in the demo. And I guess that's it. Thank you so much for spending what might be a snowy day for you, or actually worse yet, what might be a beautiful day for you, talking or listening about replacing outdated B2B e-commerce. And I will hopefully see you guys on another webinar soon. Take care.